Hello and welcome to this GCSE revision guide to an inspector calls. As normal, we're going to look at the two assessment criteria, understanding what the play is about, and its language, form and structure. This recording is going to be based around the character of Eric Birling. As normal, we're going to take a look at the stage direction at first. Priestley describes him in his middle 20s, not quite at ease, half shy, and half assertive. Priestley makes Eric appear at once indecisive, a man that has yet to grow into an adult. His immaturity is obvious from the stage direction, and Priestley exaggerates his dual nature with the oxymoron, half shy, half assertive. Eric is a man ill at ease with himself and the role he is forced to play. As an audience, we empathise with him, but also laugh at him. At his age, he should know better. Just like Arthur Birling, Eric seems to drink. But Eric uses alcohol in a very different way to Mr. Birling. He uses strong alcohol to distort the world, so he's blind to it. He hides from his crimes and himself by drinking. Right at the start, he is clearly a man ill at ease with his father and his own role. Here you have some revision notes then for Eric Birling. He is always willing to speak up. He tries to hide his drinking habits from his family. He is insightful, just like Sheila is. He quickly works out potentially the inspector isn't quite what he first appears. He's patronised by those around him, often being told to go to bed rather than take part in family discussions. By the end, you could argue that he's responsible for what he's done, although this may not last long. As with any character in Inspector Calls, you could easily look at some of them as being capitalist characters and some of them being socialist. If you don't know what those terms mean, please take a look at what's on the board at the moment, freeze the video and read up on the differences between capitalism and socialism, a really important theme of the play. Eric Birling represents then the next generation of capitalists. He is a younger Mr. Birling as he spent some time in the factory. But unlike Birling, Eric never earned his place. He will inherit it once Mr. Birling steps down. The absence of a place in society after war. In many respects, Eric is already a war veteran, educated but drunk, with no real job to do and aware of the sins of those around him. That he also represents the generation that turned their back on socialism after the First World War. Hence, the inspector has to return to the house. He also represents socialism without the intellect or life experience to really make it a reality. He has the dream of everyone being equal, but lacks the skills to make it happen. For a grade 9, we might also see Priestley as initially presenting Eric as a careless heir to the Birling estate. A boy with no responsibility to anyone around him, and used to using money to get what he wants. Once he is given responsibility, he lacks the maturity or the life skills to know what to do with it. He is presented as innocent but clumsy or stupid, perhaps an indication of what Priestley saw as the world's future. If we look at the text as a biblical text, each character might easily represent one of the 7 deadly sins. Eric represents the sins of lust and greed. He sees Daisy as a sexual object that he can control through his position and wealth. He represents the worst sins of many of the other characters and is the only one to be truly accountable for what they've done. Let's summarise Act 1. By this point, even at the start of the play, Eric is already a bit drunk when the play begins, often chipping in on conversations with silly jokes and not taking anything seriously. As a result, he often finds himself at the end of derogatory comments from Sheila and Gerald, people who are almost his own age. Arthur also speaks to him in a condescending manner, often putting him down even in social circles. As he listens to his father explaining why he fired Eva, Eric repeatedly shows more empathy for Eva than Arthur, perhaps offering an early insight into his different worldview. Some key quotes then from Eric in Act 1. He's described as being squiffy. He's told he's got a lot to learn yet. He responds when hearing about Eva asking for money with the phrase, "Why shouldn't they try for higher wages? I'd have let her stay." And when Arthur says, well, she could work in another factory if she chose to, Eric's response is, it isn't if you can't go work somewhere else. He recognises the fact that Eva's position was a difficult one. Here then is an excerpt from Act 1. Gerald. "Oh, I will. Eric suddenly guffaws, rises, crosses to Fender. His parents look at him. "Now, what's the joke?" "I don't know, I suddenly felt I had to laugh." "You're squiffy." "I'm not." "What an expression, Sheila, really things you girls pick up these days." Eric sitting on the fender away from the other characters. "If you think that's the best she can do." "Don't be an arse, Eric." The really interesting quote from this screen is the fact he guffaws. Eric is unpredictable and socially inappropriate, simplistically because he's drunk, but as a construct, Priestley has him laugh at a strange time. Perhaps Eric knows about Gerald's affairs, hence why he laughs. It is likely that Eric was in the bar when Gerald met Eva. Eric then picked up Eva when the dominant alpha male Gerald had left her. In turn, it's likely that Gerald then also knows about Eric's involvement with Eva Smith. We have him rising in the stage direction. This suggests he almost retreats from his family, feeling socially awkward and out of place in these formal situations, such as the celebration the Birlings are having. Eric repeatedly shows emotional immaturity, here foreshadowing what is yet to come. "I don't know, I felt I suddenly had to laugh." He immediately reacts with his emotions rather than thinking through what he's doing. Sheila says to him, "Don't be an arse, Eric." The way Sheila responds to him here shows us Eric's place at the bottom of the family's hierarchy. He is heir to the Birling estate, yet the title commands no respect. Contextually, Eric is interesting. He might represent a typical young gentleman of the era. At least some of the issues Eric faces stem from his gender. As a male in Edwardian society, he is currently rudderless. He has finished his varsity life at private school, but does not yet work, with his family's wealth taking away the need for him to start a career of his own. In Act 1, he's desperate to be an equal part of the conversation between Gerald and his father, but it is clear both men do not take him seriously.
Victorian etiquette for men. During the American Civil War era and in Victorian times, gentlemen were held to a certain standard of social behaviour. In fact, they were judged by their social graces, which would indicate whether a man was indeed a gentleman. A Victorian gentleman was also classified as a person who never inflicted pain to anyone. Not intentional, at least. But what did a true gentleman do to actually be gentle? Well, you will find out in this video. Here are a couple of social rules a true gentleman had to follow. 10. Avoid self-consciousness. Be so thoughtful of the comfort and happiness of others that you have no time to think of yourself and your appearance. 9. Should you be asked to play or sing, do not refuse unless you do not wish to perform. Do not refuse simply for the purpose of being coaxed, it does not appear well. 8. Leave your ego aside. Avoid talking about yourself or about affairs which interest you only, do not talk about your ill health or your afflictions of any kind. 7. Tell short stories. When you have a story to tell it in a concise manner, do not go into every detail and branch off at every word, be direct, compact, clear, and get to the point as soon as you can. Also, do not be so rude as to interrupt another in his story, however long or tiresome it may be. 6. Basic politeness. Do not be impatient or appear listless or indifferent when others are talking. Make it a point to have the appearance of being interested in the conversation. We honestly believe this stands very true today. 5. Show particular attention to elderly people. Nothing shows a better heart or is a better sign of good breeding than kindly attention to those advanced in years. As a side note, the Bible also teaches the same thing. 4. When you are in company, do not open a book and begin reading to yourself. This is disrespectful to the company. They did not have smartphones back then, but this rule would work great for nowadays. 3. Difference of opinion is one thing, contradiction is another. While the first is no cause of offense, the second is highly improper. 2. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Be tidy in dress and habits. Make careful note of this rule. Neatness is of great importance. 1. A smiling face is pleasant to see. Cultivate a cheerful, contented look. It will do your friends a great deal of good and add much to your own pleasure. And that's it.
As you can see, Eric breaks many of these rules. His proposal to Eva is interesting. It would have been considered the decent thing to do, despite the obvious barriers between their respective social class. Eric is of course high middle class, if not upper class, whereas Eva is working class. Because she didn't have any money, and Eric would know it, obviously the right thing for him to do is to marry her. He seems to crave responsibility, yet his behaviour in the meantime is perhaps the reason none is ever given to him. He's drunk, he's careless, he's overly emotional, many of the things he shouldn't be as a Victorian gentleman. So he is not responsible enough to bring up Eva's child. Even Eva, as a woman, realises this and won't give him that responsibility, despite her being in very hard times when she gets pregnant. It is only the inspector that truly confronts him with the responsibility he should have, and that only happens right at the end of the play. He responds with almost shutting down and with anger and aggression, yet again a violent emotional reaction. Eric also best resents the war veterans who returned after World War I. They never wanted war again, but believed it couldn't happen, rather than actively finding ways to make the world a better place. The belief in socialism was strong, but capitalist greed in the world that they returned to was stronger.
This was the first global war, the war that was meant to end all wars. There's still no consensus about the origin of the war, but you believe this war could have been avoided. Just explain.
I do. I mean, I think because it was such a catastrophe, we think it was bound to happen. But if you look at the years just before the war, there were other crises which didn't turn into war. So why was it in the summer of 1914 suddenly the nations of Europe plunged themselves into war? And I think we'll never know the answer, but it could be that it was partly accident, partly gamble, and of course so many of the leaders thought the war would be quick and decisive, so they were gambling that they would win what they wanted and it would all be done by Christmas. And the tragedy was that the two sides were so evenly balanced that they formed a stalemate which went on for 4 years and consumed huge numbers of lives and basically changed European society forever.
And Margaret, you write about the men who took the world to war, how these intelligent, well-meaning world leaders guided their nations to disaster, to catastrophe. And I just want to pull up something from one of your bestsellers. You wrote, "It's easy to throw up one's hands and say the Great War was inevitable." And then you go on to say, "But that is dangerous thinking, especially in a time like our own, which in some ways, not all, resembles that vanished world of the years before 1914. Right now, what parallels do you see when you look at the prosperous times before World War I and now?
Well, history never repeats itself, but there are unpleasant echoes, I think, sometimes from the past. Mark Twain put it like that. And I think what we see again are nations vying with each other, prepared to break the rules. I mean, you were talking earlier about the assassination of the journalist Adnan Khashoggi. And it seems to me that when you get nations that are prepared to break the rules, or Russia invading Crimea or trying to destabilize Ukraine, others will be encouraged. And I think we depend on an international order where there is some sort of sense of you can do this, but you shouldn't do that. And that was happening before the First World War. And I think we're also seeing sort of intolerant nationalisms which see others as somehow standing in their way and enemies. Not all nations are like this, but it seems to me there are some really worrying signs at the moment.
When listening to the clip you just have, perhaps it's even more interesting to view Eric as symbolising world leaders after World War I. They regretted the actions they had to make, but continued to make the same mistakes. In Priestley's eyes, he might have viewed them as drunk on their own success or failures, and not fully aware of the consequences their behaviour might still bring. Like Eric, they know what the right choices are, but their very being doesn't allow them to make those right choices. So another war, in this case the inspector, comes again. As the play develops then, Eric is actually sent out of the room through much of Act 2. The audience see Eric as the child of the family. Arthur works hard to send him to bed, but it also has the effect of building tension towards the climax of this scene, when Eric returns. At the beginning of the play, on the face of things, Eric seems to be little more than a drunken fool. He's been shielded from life, given every privilege, and as such, initially is very immature. From the start, however, it is clear that there are hidden depths going on here. He is desperate for approval from both his father and Gerald, and at the same time, he's the first character in the play who is able to see things from Eva's point of view. Eric is repeatedly secretive throughout Act 1, and this effect is exaggerated through his absence in Act 2, although the audience may not realise this until the end of the act. It is strongly hinted that his secrets involve women. Some key ideas then from Act 2. Eric remains off stage till the final moment of this act. Initially, we learn Arthur is speaking to him in the drawing room, trying to convince him to go to bed. Eric refuses, visibly distressed by the inspector's suggestion that he'll want to speak to him before leaving. The front door is heard, and Eric is nowhere to be found. He has gone out for a walk. His return is a dramatic device, used to heighten the shock realisation for the audience as well as the characters that he was the father of Eva's child. We now join the play then at the end of Act 2.
At all. Who is to blame then? Well, first, the girl herself.
Letting father and me have her chucked out of her jaws.
Secondly, I blame the father of the child she was going to have.
But if her story was true, and he was stealing money...
But there is no point in assuming that.
But if we do? Now what then?
Oh, then he'd be entirely responsible. Because the girl would never have come to us and have been refused assistance if it hadn't been for him.
So he's the chief culprit anyhow?
Certainly. And he ought to be dealt with very severely.
Mother, stop!
Be quiet, Sheila.
But don't you see?
Oh, you are behaving like a hysterical child tonight.
And if you would take some steps to find this young man,
And see to it that he's compelled to confess in public his responsibility, instead of staying here asking quite unnecessary questions, then you really would be doing your duty.
Don't worry, Mrs. Birling, I shall do my duty.
Oh, I am glad to hear it, and now perhaps you'd like to say good night.
Not yet. I'm waiting.
Waiting for what?
To do my duty.
now, Mother, don't you see?
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Inspector, are you trying to tell us that my boy is mixed up in all this?
If he is, then we know what to do, don't we? Mrs. Birling's just told us.
My God.
I don't believe it. I won't believe it.
Mother, I begged you and begged you to stop.
You know, don't you? Yes, we know.
Eric, I can't believe it. There must be some mistake. You don't know what we've been saying.
It's a good job for him he doesn't, isn't it?
Why?
Because Mother's been busy blaming everything on the young man who got that girl into trouble. It's her opinion that he shouldn't escape. She wants him to be made an example of.
That's enough, Sheila.
You haven't made things any easier for me, have you, Mother?
But I didn't know it was you. I never dreamt. Besides, you're not the type. You don't get drunk.
Of course he does. I told you he did.
You told her?
Well, Eric, I had to.
It was simply bound to come out, so I thought she might as well know in advance.
Oh, Sheila, I simply don't understand your attitude.
Key quotes then from Act 2. He's just talking to my son Eric, who seems to be in an excitable, silly mood. I've been trying to persuade Eric to go to bed, but he won't. We hear the front door. Eric enters, looking pale and distressed. A summary then of Act 3. The inspector questions Eric and we learn of the events of his relationship with Eva. Eric learns what happened to Eva and holds his mother directly responsible for her death and that of his unborn child. After the inspector leaves, Eric rounds on both his parents. He points out their hypocrisy and materialistic trappings. He no longer allows them to speak to him as a child, arguing back and telling them how ashamed he is of them. Along with Sheila, he's not concerned with the true identity of the inspector. For Eric, the real point is to learn from his past mistakes and change the way he treats people like Eva, rejecting the values taught by his parents. Let's join Eric then in his confession.
Just to meet this girl.
One night last November,
Where did you meet her?
in the Palace Bar. I'd been there an hour or so with 2 or 3 chaps. I was a bit squiffy.
What happened then?
I began talking to her, stood her a few drinks. I was rather far gone by the time we had to go.
Was she drunk too?
But she told me afterwards she was, a bit, chiefly because she'd not had much to eat that day.
Why had she gone there?
She wasn't the usual sort, but, well, I suppose she didn't know what to do. There was some woman who wanted her to go there. I never quite understood about that.
And you went with her to her lodgings that night?
Yes. I insisted, it seems. I'm not very clear about it, but afterwards she told me she didn't want me to go in, but that, well, I was in that sort of state when a chap easily turns nasty, and I threatened to make a row.
So she let you in?
And that's when it happened. And I didn't even remember. That's the hellish thing. Oh, God. How stupid all this is.
Oh, Eric, how could you?
Sheila, take your mother along to the drawing room.
But I want to stay.
You heard what I said. Come on, Sybil.
When did you meet her again?
About a fortnight afterwards.
By appointment?
No, I couldn't remember her name or where she lived. I happened to meet her again in the Palace Bar.
More drinks?
Yes, though that time I wasn't so bad.
And then you took her home again?
Yes. And this time we talked a bit. She told me something about herself, and I talked too. Told her my name and what I did.
And you made love again?
Yes. I wasn't in love with her or anything, but I liked her. Well, she was pretty and a good sport.
And you had to go to bed with her.
Well, I'm old enough to be married, aren't I?
Did you make arrangements to meet her again?
Yes. And the next time, the time after, she told me she thought she was going to have a baby. She wasn't sure. And then she was.
And of course she was very worried about it.
Oh, yes. And so was I. I was in a hell of a state about it.
Did she suggest that you ought to marry her?
No. She didn't want me to marry her. Said I didn't love her. All that. In a way, she treated me as if I were a kid, though I was nearly as old as she was.
Well, what did you propose to do about it?
Well, she hadn't a job, and didn't feel like trying again for one, and she hadn't any money, so I insisted on giving her enough money to keep her going, until she refused to take any more.
How much did you give her altogether?
I suppose about £50 all told.
£50? Where did you get £50 from?
Let's look a little closer at the kind of language that Eric uses when talking about his crimes. Yes, and this time we talked a bit. She told me something about herself and I talked too. Told her my name and what I did. And you made love again? Yes. I wasn't in love with her or anything, but I liked her. She was pretty and a good sport. so you had to go to bed with her. Well, I'm old enough to be married, aren't I? And I'm not married, and I hate these old tarts around the town, the ones I see your respectable friends with. I don't want any of that talk from you, as Mr. Birling crosses towards Eric. The opening line, "and we talked for a bit," implies that Eric normally talking. This implies that Eric normally talks to her. Normally does not talk to her. She was just an object to be used and left. This time we talked a bit implies then that normally they don't actually communicate. Eric's explanation here that he wasn't in love with her or anything makes clear he wasn't making love when he was with Eva, once again exaggerating his view of her as a thing or possession, or perhaps a pet. The adjective pretty is once again used to describe Eva. Her looks are what each character cares about. He also refers to her as a sport, implying the whole encounter was just a game for his amusement. Eric insults the lower classes here and links them with the upper classes. The insinuation is that he behaves the same way as his father. He says then, "I hate fat old tarts around the town." This is the wording he's using then for the lower class ladies of the town. He then suggests then that he saw some of Mr. Birling's friends, implying then he was trying to just copy them. Mr. Birling shuts him down almost immediately. Some quotes he uses to describe Eva Smith. The writer's purpose. Eric would be easy to categorise as a selfish capitalist who is in the making, who is arrogant, selfish and abusive. Of all the characters you could say he takes his fall from grace the hardest, yet, like his father and mother, quickly tries to blame others for his mistakes. The character is used by Priestley to suggest, however big the mistake, it can't be repented. It can be repented. However big the mistake, it can be repented. Eric prays to God to forgive him, and he knows that what they or he have done is a sin. Like Sheila, he becomes the teacher by the end, another proxy or mouthpiece for Priestley. He tells his parents, "I'm ashamed of you." However, he wants to share his guilt rather than accept sole responsibility. We all helped kill her. The emphasis there on we rather than just Eric himself. In summary, Eric is responsible for the suicide because he preyed on Daisy when she was at her lowest, copying Gerald's heroic behaviour. He used her for sex. He objectified her and got her pregnant. He stole money to give her, and that made her walk away as she refused to lose her morals, the last thing she actually had left. And now we join the play in Act 3 by the conclusion.
Didn't know what's happening.
Oh, I can tell you what's happening. He's admitted he was responsible for girl's condition. Now he's telling us that he supplied her with money stolen from my office.
Eric, you stole money.
Not really. I intended to pay it back.
Oh, we've heard that story before. How could you have paid it back?
I'd have managed somehow. I had to have some money.
What I want to know is, how did you manage to take as much money as that out of my office without somebody knowing?
There were some small accounts to collect, and I asked for cash.
You gave the firm's receipt and kept the money?
Yes.
Stupid young fool. Why didn't you come to me when you found yourself in this mess?
Because you're not the kind of father a chap can go to when he's in trouble. That's why!
Don't talk to me like that. Your trouble is you've been spoiled.
And my trouble is I haven't much time. You'll be able to divide the responsibility between you when I've gone. Just one last question, that's all. The girl discovered that this money you were giving her was stolen, didn't she?
Yes. That was the worst of all. She wouldn't take any more. She didn't want to see me again. Yeah, but how did you know that? Did she tell you?
No, she told me nothing. I never spoke to her.
She told Mother.
She
Well, he has to know.
She told you? But did she come here? She couldn't have done. She didn't know I lived here. What happened? Come on, don't just look like that. Tell me. Tell me what happened.
I'll tell you what happened. She applied to your mother's committee for help after she'd done with you. Your mother refused to help.
Then you killed her. She came to you to protect me and you turned her away. Yes, and you killed her. And the child she was going to have, my child, your own grandchild. You killed them both. Damn you. Damn you.
Eric, please. I didn't know. I didn't understand.
You don't understand anything. You never did. You never even tried. You...
Eric, don't.
Hysterical young fool. Keep back or I'll stop.
Now be quiet a moment and listen to me.
Let's now explore exactly how Eric communicates during this scene. Eric talking to Mrs. Birling. She told you. Did she come here? But then she couldn't have done that. She didn't even know where I lived. What happened? Tell me, what happened? I'll tell you, she went to your mother's committee for help. Your mother refused that help. Then you killed her. She came to you to protect me, and you turned her away. Yes, you killed her. And the child she'd have had too. My child, your own grandchild. You killed them both. Damn you. Damn you. Mrs. Birling, very distressed now, rises, just like Eric did at the beginning of the play, and steps forward to the fireplace. No, Eric, please, I didn't know, I didn't understand. Eric clearly in this scene then, in control, while his mother is now losing that control to her children. Eric repeats the pronoun she, as if he's distancing himself from her, yet still doesn't see her as a person. He doesn't actually mention Eva's name. Just like Sheila, Eric now gives commands and is in authority over his parents. He repeats commands to his mother. Eric's tone and short sentences here imply both his growing anger and directing the blame onto somebody else. The pronoun you is accusatory, and the frequent dashes imply his growing confidence. The direct factual way he says you killed them both acknowledges the next generation being murdered. The emotion here is blame and anger, not remorse and regret as we might expect. Key quotes then from Act 3. It's interesting to see how much he actually is scolding his parents and his growing anger across different quotes here. He repeats the same point, that the other characters killed Eva Smith. His language here is also interesting. He's the only one who seems to use particularly religious language, hellish thing and oh God, as if he knows he requires God's forgiveness for his sins. He is shocked and responds as normal with emotion. Then today, I'm just going to look at one quote in particular. And I agree with Sheila, it frightens me too. This is Eric's last line in the play. It is a sober line, as he is a man shaken to the core and now sees his parents for what they are and perhaps worries what he will become. The simplistic statement here echoes the audience's own thoughts, as the repercussions of what the Birlings have done is horrific. Sheila is the leader here. Eric's communication and empathy skills are not as strong as Sheila's, but he realises that this woman sees more clearly than he does. The full stop at the end of his statement ends Eric's story. He doesn't explain, but is left as a void, a man standing on the edge of an uncertain future. Let's now look at the audience reactions in 1945 when the play was first shown. What would they think of Eric? Priestley goes out of his way to make us think of Eric as immature, both in his outlook and his actions. By doing this, we're sympathetic to what he's going through, as he contrasts with Gerald and Arthur. There is no doubt that Eric's crime is the worst. He raped a woman. Yet the severity of these crimes is softened by Eric's at best naive and at worst stupid actions. Priestley would hope that we are willing to forgive Eric of his crimes, as he is willing to think that there may be a second chance. Now we're just going to summarise Eric at the beginning, middle and end of the play. At the beginning of the play, Eric is presented as a frivolous young man who's fond of drink. There are also subtle signs of what is to come. He is hiding something, has a negative view of women, and does not always see eye to eye with Mr. Birling. A quote, and its explanation with analysis. A quote, an explanation, and a quote, and the explanation. As the play develops, Eric is absent from the stage for nearly the whole of Act 2, but his character is still used by Priestley to create an increasing tension across the middle of the play. By the end of the play, Eric takes responsibility for his part in Eva's death. Along with his sister, he expresses genuine remorse and has noticeably changed as a person. As one of the children, he represents the future generation. Sorry for those who can't see the bottom of the screen. Now we're going to study a particular part of the exam. Remember, this is a morality play. It is trying to teach us the message of socialism. And once again, remember, none of the characters are real. They're constructs built to represent different parts of society. As in the actual exam, you will be given one page of the book. The rest of the quotes have to come from you, but perhaps it's best looking at the extract first. Today we're going to focus particularly on sentence types, tone of voice, and how characters respond to each other. Now, as we look at this extract, we can see we've got not actually much said by Eric, but what he does say tells us a lot. I will now play this extract.
Sheila, don't tease him. When you're married, you'll realise that men with important work sometimes need to spend all their time and energy on their business. You'll have to get used to that, just as I had.
I don't believe I will, so you be careful, Gerald.
Oh, I will.
Now then, Eric, what's the joke?
Don't know. Suddenly felt I just had to laugh.
You're squiffing.
I am not. Stop it, you two. Arthur, what about this famous toast of yours?
As you can see, a slightly edited version of the script. We get the idea how the characters are interacting and potentially what their tone of voice might be. Immediately, please stop the video, look at the bullet points down the side on the left and think what you would say about this extract if this comes up in the test. The first thing you might notice is that Eric says very little. He appears to be either too drunk or, more likely, much less confident than the others in social situations. Eric's loud laughter is well timed. He may know about Gerald's affairs and simply laughs at his lack of commitment. This suggests a lack of social bond with his sister, as he keeps secrets from her that she really should know. The stage direction further exaggerates his awkwardness. Eric uses short, sharp sentences here, indicating he's both unwilling and unable to talk. His explanation is stunted and socially inept, which suggests he acts before he thinks through the aftermath, a trait that is exaggerated the more we move through the play. We can then see Sheila's response to what he says, "You're squiffy." Sheila's response is one of an equal. Given the situation, Sheila's swift and blunt reply that puts Eric down clearly defines Eric as bottom of the family. Eric's tone here is aggressive and childish, once more reminiscent of a child hiding his toys. Priestley deliberately has him play the role of an immature, spoiled young man. Now, by looking at these notes and the marking criteria on the right, you can see I've begun to explore meanings and effects created by language, the form, and this extract structure. Now, subject terminology isn't very strong in these notes, but certainly I've used some. I've used my word here to describe his tone, and I've looked at short, sharp sentences. So as far as the examiner is concerned, I have covered a range of accurate subject terminology. Now let's look at how this might be written. Now this extract comes from the end of the play. So in this case, the extract comes from the beginning of the play. So my essay plan might look as follows. I might start with a summary of Eric. In my paragraph 2, I do my extract study, the example on the board there. Paragraph 3 will then cover the middle of the play, and paragraph 4 will cover Eric at the end of the play. This is then what my opening paragraph might look like. Overall, Eric suggests the theme of responsibility, linking to the question set, as this is what he wants the most, to be seen as a responsible man. Simplistically, he appears as a drunk juvenile child who commits awful acts of control over Eva Smith and regrets it by the end of the play. Having said that, Priestley challenges us to see Eric as the lost generation. He is one of many young capitalists who did not have to get work to get where he is and expects respect and responsibility rather than earning it. Once he is given responsibility, he lacks the maturity or life skills to know what to do with it. He is presented as innocent but clumsy and stupid, perhaps an indication of what Priestley saw as the future. Notice I've linked to capitalists here. I've used my context notes to help me get a deeper understanding or explore a deeper understanding of Eric and who he is as a person or construct. Then the word responsibility that's in the question appears frequently in my opening paragraph. I've clearly said what most people would think about Eric. Simplistically, he appears as, but then I've gone on to say what Priestley might actually be saying with the character. Having said that, Priestley challenges us to see Eric as the lost generation. This is the next paragraph then. As you can see, I've started with, from the outset, we see Eric dodging responsibility for each comment he makes. Eric is presented as a frivolous young man who is fond of drink. There is also subtle signs of what is to come. He is hiding something, has a negative view of women, and does not always see eye to eye with Mr. Birling. He appears to use drink in the opposite way to Mr. Birling. He wants to forget his actions, and is an early sign of his lack of responsibility. Even the stage directions suggest he is ill at ease, presenting a man struggling to find his place in the world Priestley created. He appears deliberately silent at the start before laughing loudly at Gerald, guffaws, suggesting Eric is unpredictable and socially inappropriate. Simplistically, because he's drunk, but as a construct, Priestley has him laugh at a strange time. Perhaps Eric knows about Gerald's affairs. That is why he guffaws. He repeatedly uses short, sharp sentences. I don't know, I'm not, if you think that's the best she can do, to imply that he acts without thinking, as he reacts with his emotions, not his head. The quote, I just suddenly felt I had to laugh, is important as it contradicts the formal celebration taking place and presents him as drunk and foolish. The adverb, suddenly, is very representative of Eric as he reacts on impulse, which foreshadows his reaction to Eva later in the play. His tone of voice is often filled with anger and aggression, as well as the sense that he doesn't care what others think about him. Priestley goes out of his way to make us think of Eric as immature, both in his outlook and his actions. By doing this, we're sympathetic to what he's going through as he contrasts with Gerald and Arthur. If you study this answer, you'll see I've analysed the language. For example, the word guffaws and why that stage direction is appropriate. I've used a list of quotes here to demonstrate sentence structure. You can see I've used a longer quote. I felt I suddenly had to laugh. And then I've looked particularly at the word suddenly and what that reveals about the character. I've looked at tone of voice here, And obviously I've looked at sentence structure near the top here. Okay, if you were to pause this video and then look at the marking criteria, you would suggest this is probably a level 7 or perhaps better. Now let's look at the next paragraph. As the play develops. Now I've started with that phrase to show that the character is evolving or changing. I'm clearly showing the examiner that I understand what the character is going through and how Priestley has developed the character through the narrative or through the story. On the right hand side you can see the quotes sort of early in this video that I've got in my notes. These are ones that I've memorised then, ready to write this answer. The less quotes I've memorised, the harder it is to actually write a good response. So, as the play develops, Eric is absent from the stage for nearly the whole of Act 2, but his character is still used by Priestley to create an increasing tension across the middle of the play. If he isn't in the room, he can't accept responsibility, which makes his own actions even more cruel and harsh when first heard. The other characters refer to him repeatedly throughout the scene. I've been trying to persuade Eric. I'm just talking to my son Eric, which imply the level of parental control, as the parents have over Eric, and how, even at 25, he doesn't have responsibility even in his own house and life. In Act 2, we get the sense that Eric's level of responsibility is greater than the rest. If he's not back soon, I'll have to go and get him. Is vital to the play, as Eric is one of the only characters that the inspector treats like a criminal. The line here is loaded with tension and dark undertones, as the inspector treats him like a criminal that needs to be hunted down. I shall have to go implies that the inspector, a man of high moral duty, must track Eric down in order to see that justice is done. When Eric returns, he is pale and distressed, implying that he may have accepted responsibility for his actions. You can see here once more I've analysed the language by using this long line here. I've said why that line was chosen, or why it's vital to the play, and I've analysed it down here as I look closely at the phrase, I shall have to go. I then thought about what I know about the inspector, and the idea of him hunting down Eric came from the fact that through the rest of the play, the inspector has simply stayed in one room, the characters have come to him. This implies the inspector is willing to go out of his way to get Eric as the one perhaps criminal in this play. And now I look at the end of the play. You can see a longer paragraph here, and once more you can see the quotes I would have had to memorise on the right-hand side. By the end of the play, Eric must confront his responsibility as a man, as a lover and a father. Along with his sister, he expresses genuine remorse and has noticeably changed as a person. As one of the children, he represents the future generations, yet he also represents the war leaders who felt responsibility at first before greed and power reaffirmed control. His language, by the end, is still strong and angry, as you'd expect him to be angry at himself, but he focuses more on making his parents feel responsible. You killed her. I don't give a damn. The alliteration and short, sharp sentences imply the bitterness that Eric is stopping him from reflecting on his own actions. In the end, he feels they should all take responsibility. And I agree with Sheila, it frightens me too. Eric's last line in the play is sober. He is a man shaken to the core. Now he sees his parents for what they are and perhaps worries what he will become. The simplistic statement here echoes the audience's own thoughts, as the repercussions of what the Birlings have done is horrific. He says, I agree with Sheila, as Sheila is the leader here. Eric's communication and empathy skills are not as strong as Sheila's, but he realises this woman sees more clearly than he does. The full stop ends Eric's story. He doesn't explain, but is left as a void, a man standing on the edge of an uncertain future. There is no doubt that Eric's crime is the worst. He raped a woman, yet the severity of these crimes are often softened by Eric's at best naive and at worst stupid actions. Priestley would hope that we are willing to forgive Eric of these crimes, as he's willing to think there might be a second chance. You can see the answer is long. It explains its answer, its ideas, has repeatedly used quotes and evidence. It links to the reader quite a bit, clearly stating both our reactions to the character as well as Priestley's intentions and why the writer actually wrote him in that way. Now, if I was doing a question responsibility. I'm not sure I would use Eric as my example. I'd probably use him perhaps as one of my examples, but equally talked about Eric, Mr. Birling, Arthur, and Mrs. Birling as well. But hopefully by hearing this revision guide and looking through this exam answer here, this has given you some ideas of some really good stuff you can write about Eric. Thank you very much then for listening to this revision video on the character of Eric Birling, a character in Inspector Calls from your GCSE post-1914 drama.